Chapter 21, Intermediate Transfiguration. Learning Transfiguration requires extremely hard work, as it is more rigorous and scientific than other subjects. In Transfiguration, only complete correctness can be considered success. Professor McGonagall stepped down from the podium, tapping Harry's textbook with her wand. Now, please turn your textbooks to page 5. I will repeat the passage there. When performing Transfiguration, it is very important to wave your wand firmly and decisively. Do not wave or twirl your wand unnecessarily, or the Transfiguration will surely fail. Before casting a Transfiguration spell, clearly visualize in your mind what you want the object to become. Professor McGonagall emphasized 2 key points in a row and, after demonstrating the counterspell Finite Incantatem, instructed the students to transform the matches on their desks into silver needles. The class eagerly tried, but few succeeded. No matter what gestures they made or how they pronounced the incantation, the matches stayed stubbornly unchanged. Confusion and frowns spread across the room. Hermione, meanwhile, stared intently at Chien. His eyes flickered as he recalled and thought. Transfiguration, he knew, is the form of magic that most directly embodies a wizard's will. It perfectly illustrated a truth. Magic is inherently a kind of miracle, and wizards are the ones who control those miracles. With a clear intention, firm belief, and enough mental power, even a first-year student could change the very nature of an object. I know the structure of a match, and I'm confident I can do this, Chien told himself. He could delve deeper into the match's structure or give himself stronger suggestions, but he was more curious about something the magical theory texts had hinted at. What emotion best channels a particular spell? If the feeling for Lumos is simply the desire for light, what feeling should drive Transfiguration? It's a command, he decided. I am a god, Transfigura-Tien. You have practiced a low-level Transfiguration spell to an expert standard, proficiency plus 30. Light burst from the tip of Cien's wand. The match on his desk turned instantly into a silver needle, its tip gleaming coldly. A small hole appeared at its base. Every head in the room snapped toward him. Oh my goodness, he did it. How did he do that? Who is it? Who is it? Chien, huh? Hermione's mouth fell open. She was sure she hadn't missed a single detail. So why had Chien succeeded when she had waved her wand and said the spell the same way? Mr. Green, Professor McGonagall stepped forward quickly, her eyes fixed on the silver needle. Relief and an approving smile softened her stern features. She was about to speak when her expression shifted. Stay away from Mr. Green, immediately. Her sharp command made the nearby students step back. Chien barely noticed the commotion. His gaze was focused and steady. I can do more, he told himself. Transfiguration. He swished his wand more forcefully. The rat in the cage beside him actually transformed into a small snuff box. It wasn't a perfect change. The rat's tail still twitched, but the whole classroom breathed a collective wow. You have practiced an intermediate transfiguration spell to an introductory standard, proficiency 50. Mr. Green, McGonagall said, her voice trembling slightly, the sternness giving way to astonishment. Unsettling talent. Chien, a little exhausted, glanced at her shyly. The tight line of her lips softened and genuine joy appeared in her eyes. Advanced Transfiguration. Because of your performance, Mr. Green, I will award 10 points to Ravenclaw. Professor McGonagall looked pleased. Michael shouted, throwing an arm into the air and accidentally pocketing Terry's match from the desk in front of him. Terry, coming back to his senses, hadn't even begun to get angry when Michael announced, Look at Chien's Transfiguration, Terry. Ravenclaw got 10 points. Terry looked at Chien, paused, then broke into an embarrassed smile. Michael laughed, jingling the match in his hand. Anthony, who was leading the applause, shook his head in amusement. You have practiced an intermediate transfiguration spell to an apprentice standard, proficiency plus 10. You have practiced an intermediate transfiguration spell to an apprentice standard, proficiency plus 10. You have practiced an intermediate transfiguration spell to an apprentice standard, proficiency 10. Although class hadn't yet ended, Chien, feeling a second wind, continued practicing to grind his proficiency. When his energy was finally spent, he panted and glanced at his panel. Transfiguration, apprentice level 13900. Advance, entry-level transfiguration, can unlock the entry-level title in the transfiguration field. Progress was rapid. I really do have a knack for this, he thought. He was eager to see what the entry-level title would be, but his immediate priority was reaching a level that would let him brew potions. For that, he needed to understand how to prepare potion ingredients so he could gain proficiency through practice. "Where's my match?" Terry suddenly shouted before class ended. Michael bolted from the room like a wind. As he rushed past Xian, he managed one quick, "You're amazing, Xian." Xian watched Terry chase after Michael, chuckled softly, and headed toward the greenhouse. In the corridor just outside, he saw a familiar figure. "Senior Bruce," Xian called, hurrying over. "Ah, Xian!" Senior Bruce smiled gently. "Going to the greenhouse together?" Xian nodded, and they walked down the long corridor together. Sunlight streamed through, bathing Hogwarts in warmth. Slanted shadows from suits of armor and statues lay across the floor, and portraits were still gossiping with one another. Xian watched a lady portrait turn her head away from an approaching knight with curiosity. "Do you know why Professor Sprout needs things like snake fangs processed?" Xian asked. Bruce raised an eyebrow. "For the new students' potions?" "That's my guess," Xian said. "You're really showing why you were sorted into Ravenclaw," Bruce replied, hands spread in a helpless, fond gesture. "So you must have some idea what we'll be doing today." Xian thought for a moment, then admitted, "I don't know." "Aha!" Bruce looked pleased to have found something Xian didn't already know. "We're processing slugs, both with and without antenna, and porcupine quills. If we move fast, we should finish today." Xian nodded, feeling a flash of anticipation. If he could learn all these ingredient processing techniques today, he would be well on his way to preparing potions. Carrying that quiet excitement, he pushed open the wooden door of the greenhouse. Chapter 22, Candied Pineapple. When handling tentacled slugs, watch how their mucus is distributed. Try to choose the moment when they secrete the most. If you see them extending their tentacles to touch the table, don't hesitate. That's the best time for boiling. One more thing. When small bubbles appear in the cauldron, you can stop boiling. "Very good, Mr. Dickinson. Perfectly handled." "Oh, Mr. Green, perhaps you boiled it a little too long. Remember, stop when small bubbles appear." Inside the greenhouse, 12 cauldrons bubbled away and steam drifted through the warmth, setting the pumpkin-shaped plants gently swaying. Professor Sprout had just finished praising Senior Bruce when she hurried over to Xian and helped him coax a runaway slug back onto the table. She smiled kindly. "Mr. Green, don't let the slugs escape next time." Xian was flustered. He had been juggling 2 cauldrons at once. Senior Bruce moved with a calm, practiced ease. Professor Sprout, meanwhile, could manage 7 cauldrons and still find the time to guide him. Observe the mucus, wait for the bubbles. Xian silently repeated her instructions as he worked. His technique improved slowly, though he still fumbled now and then. The liquid in his cauldrons darkened to a deep green. When Professor Sprout came to inspect, Xian gripped his spoon and braced for judgment, not just because he doubted his talent, but because the ingredients were expensive. Tentacled slugs cost a galleon per jar in Diagon Alley. Magical supplies were alarmingly pricey. It occurred to him that potions must be highly profitable, or else one couldn't afford to brew them. Professor Sprout nodded. "Mr. Green, a qualified handling." Xian let out a small, relieved breath. The professor allowed them to use materials freely in class, but wastefulness was still something he wanted to avoid. Once he found the rhythm, he finished processing the slugs quickly. The 3 students bottled the boiled liquid and set aside the largest, most mucus-rich slugs in a big jar. Professor Sprout explained that selecting the slugs with the most mucus would increase their chances when they later brewed Murtlap essence. The boiled slugs would be kept as demonstration specimens and to assist Professor Snape with some preliminary work. While they picked porcupine quills, Professor Sprout dropped a surprising bit of news. "Yes, children, herbology and potions are always interdependent. Severus always comes to the greenhouse during harvest season." Xian pictured Professor Snape wielding a hoe for a ridiculous second before returning to the task at hand. "Porcupine quills should be about 3 inches long," he heard her say, "and about the thickness of 2 slug tentacles." Leaving the greenhouse, Xian reviewed the process in his head and recorded the key points on the parchment he carried. He now understood all 4 ingredients for Murtlap essence: dried nettle, porcupine quills, poisonous snake fangs, and tentacled slugs, so the first step of his plan was done. The thought warmed him. Do you really need to write it down again? We've already left the greenhouse, Senior Bruce said, arms folded, pulling Shi-En aside before he walked into a suit of armor with his head in the parchment. On the armor, a lady in a ceremonial gown covered her mouth and chuckled, and the knight opposite her stared, frozen in metal mortification. The clock pointed to 6 o'clock. A gentle breeze drifted through the corridors, and warm, slanted sunlight dappled the stone. In the distance, the Hogwarts bells chimed. Senior Bruce turned to leave. Before he could say goodbye, a small piece of candied pineapple was placed in his palm. Snack exchange, Hufflepuff tradition, Senior Bruce, someone said. He blinked in surprise as Shi-En already hurried away. Leon closed his book and shrugged. Is he really not a Hufflepuff? Maybe the Sorting Hat made a mistake. Bruce carefully pocketed the candied fruit, then, suddenly, leapt forward and grabbed Leon and Pister in a tight, affectionate trio hug. His arms locked their heads together like a warm clasp. Gotcha, he laughed. Idiots. Leon stumbled, and Pister protected his potted plant with exaggerated care. Since he'd borrowed half the library yesterday, Shi-En's real problem was not a lack of sources, but a shortage of time. The library closed at 8. Dinner began at 6:30. He needed to get his work done. So after dinner, he skipped the library and headed straight for Ravenclaw Tower. The Ravenclaw dormitory was a double room with desks and floating candles, the same kind that lit the Great Hall. It was, unsurprisingly, an excellent place to work. The wisdom of Ravenclaw, Shi-En thought, smiling to himself. At the Great Hall entrance, he nearly ran into Michael, who was finishing a game of gobstones. Going up? Michael asked, wiping his hands on his robes. Yes, Shi-En answered. Oh, wait for me. Michael made a dramatic move, knocking his opponent's last stone and declaring narrow victory. He tucked the gobstones away and hurried after Shi-En. The stairs to Ravenclaw were infamously long. Michael puffed and complained on the way up. The welcome speech said Ravenclaw would help students climb the steps of wisdom, but it didn't mention how many steps there are. He looked up at the endless stone flight and groaned. Merlin, do we have to climb these for 7 years? A sudden gust of wind announced the arrival of an older Ravenclaw flying in on a broomstick, drawing admiring murmurs and exclamations from the students on the staircase. Cool, Michael breathed, distractedly watching the broom rider sail by. The climb gradually became easier, and the top finally neared. Michael, who had begun grumbling about steps, had shifted into reminiscing about Quidditch. Maybe people think the Chudley Cannon's glory days are over, he was saying, but everyone knows they'll be back. He paused mid-complaint and turned to look at Shi-En, who was suddenly swaying, eyes half closed. Shi-En! Michael called, his voice cracking with concern. Chapter 23, Potion Ingredient Shortage. Are you all right? Michael carefully helped Shi-En to his feet. The young wizard was still breathing hard. I'm fine, Shi-En said after a moment, steadying himself. He had overestimated his strength. His body was still recovering from a serious illness. He made a mental note to walk more slowly and to make learning to fly his top priority once he had the scholarship. Once they were back in the dormitory, Shi-En's workload felt suddenly manageable. He only had the basics: history of magic, transfiguration, potions, charms, and defense against the dark arts. What had been due in a week looked doable now. He finished the defense essay in half an hour and the charms essay in less than 20 minutes. The only long task left was the history of magic paper, a foot-long essay he had mostly finished before. Only the conclusion remained. You're kidding me, Michael muttered, stunned. You just, like that, finished 3 assignments? Including that terrifyingly long history of magic essay? Shi-En shot back, turning his head so his long lashes fluttered. Don't look at me like it's nothing. Are you saying you couldn't do it? Michael slammed his book shut. I swear, no one else has finished these. He hurried out of the room and returned with 2 other students, Terry and Anthony, trailing behind him. Sorry to bother you, Anthony said politely. Michael said there's someone who can help. Merlin sent help, right? Terry started to speak, then fell silent when Shi-En covered his mouth with a look. Shi-En, look, everyone's behind. Michael proudly held up 2 sheets of parchment filled with cramped writing, nearly 3 inches of text, but still nowhere near a foot. So please, teach us, Xian blinked. It was a lot of work, certainly, but not impossible. He glanced at the three eager faces and nodded, picking up his own parchment and his notebook. Actually, he said, pointing to his notes, the history essay is simple if you break it down. Bin set the topic as Emeric the Evil and Uric the Oddball. First, draw a timeline and figure out when these two lived. He showed them the timeline he had sketched and handed it over. The three hunched closer, unable to look away. Next, look into their backgrounds. The entries in History of Magic are detailed enough for that. Second step, combine the background with context to analyze their actions. There's a good line in the book. It's unfair to judge characters out of context. Third step, reassess their actions and form your own argument. Fourth, compare them to other figures and events in the historical record and apply historical theory. That's the heart of a historical essay. Finally, write a conclusion about the value of your argument and, if you can, add some broader implications. Xian flipped open a half-filled notebook. Bin's timeline in History of Magic is messy, so I organized mine by cross-referencing other books, famous wizards, peculiar magical failures, and their lessons. You can use my notes directly. As he spoke, the three faces changed from blank to bright. Michael took the notebook like it was holy. Xian, you're an angel Merlin sent to save us. This is my Bible, my parchment. Where's my parchment? I'm going to go at it another 300 rounds. Terry and Anthony were suddenly wildly enthusiastic. The three of them dove into Xian's notes, quills scratching. The dormitory fell to the soft sounds of writing and the fire cracking in the hearth. Anthony's grateful "thank you" lingered in Xian's ears. He smiled and then, with the same ease, finished the Transfiguration essay as well. That same method could be applied to other assignments, Xian realized. He didn't pay much attention to the two extra students lingering in the room. He put the potions assignment aside and jotted the next item of his plan into his portable notebook. Finding ingredients for brewing potions. He already understood the processing steps for materials. Once he had the ingredients, the preliminary work for brewing would be done. But where would he get the ingredients? The enrollment list didn't require students to buy their own supplies. Hogwarts provided ingredients for potions. Could students use them outside of class? It seemed possible, but convincing Professor Snape to allow it was almost impossible. Xian pictured Snape's face, an immediate refusal. He sighed. If anything was worse than lacking talent, it was lacking talent and then running into Professor Snape. The problem looped through his mind as dusk settled over Hogwarts. Banners of blue and bronze hung from the vaulted ceiling, their colors deepening in the thin moonlight. The castle smelled of old pages and leather-bound books, a crispness like air after rain. Xian's gaze drifted to the great arched window. His emerald eyes reflected the flicker from the fire like a veil of Scottish mist. There has to be a way, he told himself. This is Hogwarts. The long night passed. Morning light warmed the stone statues in the corridor and made Xian raise a hand to shield his eyes. It was Wednesday. Ravenclaw had no first-period class, so many first years were still asleep. Xian, however, was awake early. Old habits from the orphanage made him get up at breakfast time, and he knew better than to miss it. He made his way to the great hall and set about a hearty breakfast of pumpkin soup, chicken and ham pies, and cribbage crackers. Justin appeared beside him with a gentle smile. "Good morning, Xian." "Good morning," Xian replied. Justin pulled out a thick book, Directory of Contemporary Famous Wizards, and began flipping through it. Hogwarts is incredible. If Professor Binns hadn't assigned that foot-long essay, I would have had more time to explore the castle, especially the kitchens near the Hufflepuff common room. As he spoke about the kitchens, Justin's expression darkened slightly. He frowned in a way Xian had seldom seen. The word kitchen had already brightened Xian's eyes. He wanted more snacks as much as anyone. Then he noticed Justin's sudden change and leaned in. Professor Binns also gave Hufflepuff the foot-long essay, also? Justin looked up, surprised. Could it be? 24, Herbalism class. Ghosts are truly strange. There's the amiable fat friar, nearly headless Nick, and even a professor. Justin Finch-Fletchley stared at his homework, the page filled with a tentative outline. Oh, if only Professor Binns wouldn't get muddled halfway through, he muttered. Cedric Diggory says we've never had such a long first-year assignment. I tried to find Professor Binns and couldn't. Well, even if I had, I doubt he'd change his mind. A foot of homework, Merlin. This is a lot. Sean, have you finished yours? Justin closed his parchment with an embarrassed little smile, his eyes shining with hopeful admiration. Sean Green nodded and pulled a piece of parchment and a pale blue notebook from his bag. The parchment was a compilation of essay points collected from Michael Corner and others. The notebook was Sean's own, carefully condensed and organized history of magic. He kept another identical notebook for ideas and flashes of inspiration. Oh my goodness, Sean, you actually finished it? Justin covered his mouth with his hand. I know this kind of thing is easy for you, but it still seems impossible every time. Are we really in the same year? His voice tailed off into almost nothing. I'll only glance at a little of the outline. I definitely won't copy your work. If I do, may I never set foot in the kitchens again. He said it with mock solemnity, but the gray-blue of his eyes looked genuinely anxious and earnest. Sean handed the notebook to him and left the great hall for the library. Morning was when he had the most energy, and he used it to tackle the hardest tasks, like reorganizing his whole history of magic, cross-referencing a history of modern magic, important magical events of the 20th century, and the directory of contemporary famous wizards until a distinctive framework of facts and dates emerged. He was convinced it would make him shine in Professor Binns' lessons. The oak tables of the library glowed brown beneath enchanted lamps and crystal globes. A few small flower arrangements softened the stacks. Sean lost himself in the oddities of magical history and admitted with a private grin that wizards could be livelier than the textbooks let on. For example, in the Middle Ages, Muggles were terrified of magic, but poor at recognizing it. Occasionally, they caught a witch or wizard, but burning them proved ineffective. The accused would cast a simple freezing flame and pretend to writhe in pain while enjoying the gentle tingling of the spell. Gwendolyn the Weird, in fact, loved being burned and allowed herself to be caught in disguise 47 times. That was nothing like the grim burnings Sean had pictured, and nothing like the solemn history he had imagined. Still, after finishing his notes on the Middle Ages, he came back to the problem that had been nagging him since herbology. Where would he get potion ingredients? Maybe Professor Sprout kept extra stores? Maybe he could buy some in Hogsmeade. If he could discover the castle's secret passages, or perhaps he could ask Professor Sprout if a pupil might use Hogwarts potion supplies after class to practice. Dangerous, but not impossible. There were more solutions than problems. He would sort it later. He opened the notebook to plan and then froze at the top of the first page he turned to. Emeric the Evil was a short-lived but exceptionally vicious dark wizard. He flipped on. Uric the Oddball, hearing the cry of an augury, was sure he had died and become a ghost. Across the castle, in the great hall, Justin was hunched over Sean's pale blue notebook. He read, breathed, and occasionally gasped aloud. You can say it like this, truly brilliant. He had paused over one heading in particular, seeking potion brewing materials. Sean wants to practice potion making, Justin thought. Sean doesn't have the materials. I have them. That decided him. He carefully closed the parchment and notebook, and before the next herbology lesson began, dashed back to the Hufflepuff common room. The small common room smelled of wax and candy. Green vines spiraled around stone archways, and the teeming tables were usually set with steaming milk, pumpkin juice, pies, and sweets. A candlelit corridor led to the dormitories. Justin opened his big trunk. Neat letters and postcards lay beside jars and crystal vials, and there, packed like a private army, were 2 complete sets of first-year potion ingredients. He remembered the day at Slug and Jigger's apothecary. Are you sure you want everything in one set? The shopkeeper had asked. Yes, please, sir. Oh, my generous lady, I would never think to cheat a pretty lady such as yourself. These ingredients aren't on the Hogwarts list, you know. Still, do you want them? All the more reason to pack 2 sets, sir. His mother's voice echoed in his head. My dear Finch Fletchley, if everyone has something, you must have it better. If no one has something, you should have it even more. Those little expenses are investments. The best investment, remember, is always sincerity and love. Justin stood a long moment, staring at the overflowing trunk. He could almost feel the warmth of his mother's iron on the collar of his always crisp shirt. He carefully wrapped one complete set in a cloth and put it into his pocket. Back at the library, Sean left the archway and waited for the staircase to turn. He didn't plan to run back for his notebook. The second herbology lesson was about to begin, and there was nothing in his notes that was a secret, only his methods for processing herbs and his private plans for finding potion ingredients. He could swap the useful pages with Justin after class and get his notebook back. 8 o'clock. Soft sunlight bounced off suits of armor, and the scent of greenhouse soil drifted down the corridors. Sean pushed open the large oak door and found the greenhouses full of first years already gathered. Professor Sprout put down her hoe, smiled, and waved him over. "Over here, Sean!" Michael Corner grabbed Sean's sleeve and dragged him beside Anthony and Terry. "Why do I get the feeling the professor's staring straight at you?" Michael said, craning his neck. Chapter 25. The Intersections of Magical Subjects. "Ah, warm sunshine, a gentle breeze, and new sprouts," Professor Sprout said with evident delight, her head cocked to one side. The students immediately turned their attention to the stout witch. Her wide-brimmed hat sat atop her unruly hair, and her clothes were flecked with soil. "I heard," Michael murmured under his breath, "Professor Sprout is the most popular teacher at Hogwarts. She's also head of Hufflepuff. Asking her for help with anything is never a bad choice." The damp, earthy scent of soil and fertilizer mixed with a rich floral perfume as the professor continued. "Welcome to herbology, where you'll learn how to cultivate these exotic plants and fungi and understand their uses." She tapped a pink pod lightly. A glossy bean popped out and unfurled into a bright flower. A chorus of gasps rippled through the class. "Is this magic?" Michael muttered to himself, then turned to Chien. "Do you know? It's the bubble pod," Chien answered. "It's on page 62 of 1,000 Magical Herbs and Fungi. Bubble pods grow plump pink pods that contain shiny beans. The beans bloom immediately on contact with any solid object." Anthony and Terry, who had been paying close attention, both scribbled down Chien's explanation at once. Michael just said, "Uh-huh, I knew it." Professor Sprout's lesson covered the same ground Chien had already learned. Whenever the plump professor couldn't find someone to answer a question, she seemed to call on Chien. "Does anyone know what this plant is?" You, Mr. Green." "Dittany," said Mr. Green. "A plant with healing and restorative properties." "Correct, Ravenclaw 1 point. Now, can anyone tell me how we should process dittany?" "Oh, no one, Mr. Green?" "Generally, dittany is more effective when extracted into an essence, but it can heal superficial wounds even if eaten raw," Mr. Green replied. "Exactly right. Ravenclaw, another point. Last question. What's the use of dittany? How should it be used for treating werewolf bites? Think back to your Defense Against the Dark Arts class." No one answered. Professor Quirrell's class had fallen behind, and material that should have been covered earlier had barely been introduced. "Oh, what a pity." Then, "Wizards once combined dittany with silver dust to treat werewolf bites to prevent victims from dying of excessive blood loss," Chien supplied. "Perfect answer. Ravenclaw, 2 points." Professor Sprout beamed. She looked out over the class with a smile and, undeterred, continued to lead them through hands-on herb processing. "All right, Sprouts, since you didn't get this in Defense Against the Dark Arts, don't drift off now." Everyone put on gloves and examined the dittany carefully as she demonstrated how to process mature plants. Michael leaned in and whispered, "Is Chien related to Professor Sprout or something?" Chien shook his head. "No. Are you her private?" Michael began. Anthony clapped a hand over Michael's mouth. The sudden interruption let his better judgment return. He gave a sheepish shrug and mouthed an apology. Chien could only stare, bemused. After demonstrating dittany, Professor Sprout added a few notes on processing dried nettle. Chien frowned a little and thought. The teaching at Hogwarts wasn't as haphazard as it sometimes seemed. In Defense Against the Dark Arts, they'd covered the use of dittany for werewolf bites. In herbology, they were shown identification and processing methods for dried nettle, the exact ingredients for brewing murtlap essence. It suggested the curriculum had been carefully designed after all. Chien worked through processing dittany while considering this. "You have completely processed a dittany to apprentice standards, proficiency +1. You have completely processed a Dittany to apprentice standards, proficiency +1. You have completely processed a Dittany to apprentice standards, proficiency +1. Although his proficiency remained at apprentice level, Shien felt steadier than many of the other students, just like the difference between him and Senior Bruce. When class ended, Professor Sprout gave them an open-ended assignment: distinguish truly mature Dittany plants. As she left the greenhouse, she even winked at Shien. In the corridor outside, Shien paused by a suit of armor. A portrait of a lady in a ceremonial gown smiled and inclined her head. Shien nodded back, then opened his panel. Herbology cognition unlocked. By processing Dittany, Shien gained 21 proficiency. Apprentice-level herbology cognition can unlock the apprentice-level title in the herbology field. There was another herbology class that afternoon. He'd likely earn the title then. He also had a feeling about his herbology talent. Like checking answers on a familiar exam, the result would be almost immediately apparent. Maybe he wasn't as hopeless as he feared. Walking through the greenhouse had given him another impression. Hogwarts was wealthy. The professors seemed to be quietly well off too. Shien had noticed some dried nettle tucked in shaded corners that were past their prime and should have been processed but weren't, the plants arranged carefully under umbrella-sized leaves. He wagered they were for sale. Perhaps he could ask Senior Bruce, who handled sales, or perhaps Hufflepuff students did most of the work. If so, he might be able to purchase some in advance, though it would surely be costly. There's no gain without effort, he thought, and reached for his portable notebook. He toyed with his shorthand quill, then decided to head to the Great Hall for dinner. He hadn't gone far when a familiar face stepped in front of him. Justin, looking conspiratorial. "Oh, Shien," Justin said. "I know a little about that. I swear I didn't read ahead, but, coincidentally, I can help." Chapter 26. Hufflepuff Common Room. Shien, this might be a bit forward, but are you planning to practice potions by yourself? Justin set a sheet of parchment and a pale blue notebook into Shien's hand. His voice was gentle, with the faintest edge of worry. Shien nodded. If he didn't build skill through practice, his natural talent for potions would only just be enough to scrape by. Excellence was a distant hope. He wouldn't bet on it. "Are you looking for ingredients? The 4 for Murtlap essence?" Justin asked. When Shien nodded again, Justin visibly relaxed. A warm, proper smile brightened his face. "Maybe I can help. Come on, there's somewhere I want to take you." He led a curious Shien through the Great Hall and down the steps toward the Hufflepuff level. The stone corridor was well lit. Shien took in the unfamiliar sights, feeling a little thrill of discovery. "Oh, before we pass the kitchens, I should tell you this secret," Justin said with a conspiratorial grin. He stopped in front of a painting of a bowl of fruit and reached out to tickle a pear in the picture. The pear giggled and became a green doorknob. The wall swung open to reveal the entrance to the kitchens. Shien couldn't help the smile. He'd half thought a food side quest had been triggered. "Ask nicely, and the house elves will spoil you silly," Justin murmured. "But you can't bring Peeves in." "This isn't where we're going today," Justin went on. "We're almost there, the Hufflepuff Common Room." They reached a stack of large barrels tucked into a corner. Justin tapped the lids of 2 middle barrels in the second row in a patterned rhythm. The lids swung open, revealing a sloping passage inside the barrels, lit by little enchanted lamps. It led to a round, cozy room like a badger's set, all warm honey colors and Hufflepuff cheer. Black and yellow banners, honey-colored wooden tables, and round doors gave the space a gentle, lived-in feel. Circular shelves held potted cacti that waved lazily as students passed. Copper-bottomed pots hung from the ceiling with ferns that brushed and seemed to tidy anyone walking beneath them. A fireplace carved with dancing badgers dominated one wall. Above it hung a portrait of Helga Hufflepuff, raising a 2-handled golden cup. Near the floor-level windows, nestled in at ground level beneath the castle, views of swaying grass and dandelions drifted by. Despite the low windows, the room was sunny all year round. "Welcome to the Hufflepuff Common Room," Justin said. He produced an expensive-looking suitcase from beside a plump sofa and opened it. Shien blinked. A neat pile of galleons glittered inside, along with letters and postcards, and an assortment of jars and crystal vials. He recognized some of the contents right away. dried nettle, slug tentacles in brine, vials of venomous snake fangs, bundles of porcupine quills. They were all pricey ingredients. Xian's mind did the math. A bundle of dried nettle cost a galleon and would cover more than 30 brews. A jar of slug tentacles was another galleon and could be stretched over 40. The bottle of snake fangs and the bundle of porcupine quills were 2 galleons each, 6 galleons altogether, an expense for any student. He hesitated. "Could I buy some of these?" he asked, not sure he wanted to say it out loud. Justin smiled warmly. "I thought they might be useful to you." He began slipping the jars and vials into Xian's bag. "If you're going to brew, consider it my support." Xian opened his mouth to refuse. Then Justin added quietly, "I believe you'll do well. If you fail, I have another set here." The earnestness in his voice left little room for a refusal. Leaving the common room, Justin's steps were lighter than they had been when they arrived. Xian heard, half in his imagination, the echo of Justin's mother's words, "My dear Finch Fletchley, remember, everyone has different strengths. The Finch Fletchleys are good at bringing strengths together." That thought seemed to fit Justin. He could be gentle and stubbornly determined to help. In the end, Xian didn't refuse. Justin sometimes refused to be dismissed, and he'd already been helping Xian with herbology and history of magic homework. "If you'll let me help with the schoolwork, but won't let me help in other ways, what kind of friends would we be?" Justin had said, half joking, half serious. Xian told himself it was good to have a Hufflepuff friend. At noon in the Great Hall, Xian ate as if he'd never seen a meal before. The weight lifted a little from him now. Justin sat beside him, flipping through several small notebooks. Xian's notes for Defense Against the Dark Arts and Transfiguration. Justin's progress in those subjects was already beyond the class, so the notes were almost like cheat sheets for him. Hermione, nearby, noticed the slightly different energy at the table. Justin was eating faster than usual. She suspected Xian's influence. As they left the table, Justin spoke softly. "If you run into trouble, come to me. Remember, friends." His calm gray eyes reflected the firelight from the nearby hearth. Xian nodded. The warmth inside the Hogwarts fireplaces and in Hufflepuff itself felt unexpectedly comforting. For a moment, he wished the Sorting Hat had put him in Hufflepuff too. That afternoon in Greenhouse 3, Xian worked on processing the dried nettle. Ordinary plants at first, they changed when soaked in a special blue solution. The resulting extract could be used for swelling solution and, crucially, murtlap essence. Professor Sprout pointed out that nettle essence could be adapted, used as a sedative or a hypnotic, depending on how a witch or wizard handled it. Compared to the younger student's clumsiness, incorrect dosages, poor chopping, or wrong soaking times, Xian's method looked practiced and precise. A few Ravenclaws and even some Slytherins clustered near, murmuring questions and following Professor Sprout's cue to watch and learn. Meanwhile, his little notification panel kept pinging, reminders and practice prompts with each successful step of the process. You have fully processed a nettle to an apprentice standard, proficiency +1. New herbology field title unlocked. Please check. A wizard talent has been unlocked. Please check. 2 days later, Xian had finished unlocking the herbology title. He eagerly checked the details. Slightly increases perception of plants. Slightly enhances herbology talent. Increased perception of plants? That sounded useful. He read on. Wizard and herbology talent, green, with herbology intern title bonus. Original talent was white. Note, the average wizard is green. The change from white to green didn't thrill him. Green was ordinary, but at least it could be improved by increasing proficiency. Soon the effect was tangible. When the class was identifying dried mature nettles, some odd intuition nudged him to pick a freshly matured specimen. After soaking and processing it, he reached a new standard. You have fully processed a nettle to an entry-level standard, proficiency +3. Professor Sprout walked over, surprised and pleased. Excellent work. Observe these processed nettles. The stinging hairs and soft down are gone. That's what you want in a fine nettle specimen. Mr. Green, you're making rapid progress. She smiled and added, I shall award Ravenclaw 2 points. After herbology class, as they left the greenhouses, Xian heard the other first years whispering. Is that Xian Green? You've heard of him, right? I'm tired of hearing about him. They say he's brilliant in charms and transfiguration. Does he come from a magic family? Worse, they say he's muggle-born. When Xian glanced over, the two students went red and hurried off. Michael laughed. Looks like you're famous now, he teased. I've never seen a wizard good at everything except potions. His voice trailed off when astronomy class started. Stairs, stairs, and more stairs. Michael was breathless as they climbed. They say the astronomy tower is the tallest tower at Hogwarts, higher even than Ravenclaw Tower. He kept pace behind Xian, trading off small gossip with Anthony, the three of them following closely. Professor Aurora Sinistra had an imposing presence. Her astronomy lessons taught them to observe stars through telescopes, to name constellations, and to track planetary orbits. The classroom was full of instruments, moon globes, lunar charts, lunoscopes, star charts, and telescopes, like a miniature research institute, except the night view was gorgeous and the instruments were quiet and precise. Because he already understood the mechanics of telescopes, Xian was quickly noticed. Sinistra even let him work with a large, polished metal sphere to predict Io's trajectory. Terry, usually taciturn, grew green with envy and asked Xian about the device 3 times. Xian explained patiently. Terry's awe was obvious. "Oh, Merlin, that must be wonderful. Those lunoscopes are so rare," Terry breathed. After astronomy, it was almost curfew. Xian's legs ached from climbing 2 tall towers back to back, but he still organized his notes. First-year astronomy was mostly memorization, star names, and planetary paths, and the only tricky part was drawing the orbit diagrams. That was easy for a methodical student like him. Compulsory education had trained him well. Before bed, he pulled out his potions and history of magic books to prepare. The brewing work for their upcoming potion was already done, but Xian wanted to find technique in the dry instructions. The recipe listed steps and terse notes, yet small hints were there. When making Murtlap essence, stir 2 turns to the left, then 3 to the right, and apply a moderate force. What counted as moderate? He found a clue in History of Magic. The self-stirring cauldron is an enchanted cauldron that stirs automatically. The stirring spoon often breaks bubbles. So breaking bubbles must be the right amount of force. History had been a good teacher long before, and he thought, it still was in the magical world. The Ravenclaw common room was quiet, but that didn't mean no one played. After finishing his history essay, Michael had spent an hour on a game of Reversi. Seeing Xian still absorbed in his books, he caught Terry's eye. Terry was fiddling with a handful of stones, and grinned. "Xian, come on," Michael said when Xian changed books. "You can't study all the time. You're ahead in charms, transfiguration, history. Don't you ever get bored?" "Bored?" Xian looked up, baffled. Magic wasn't boring. It was immediate and rewarding. The more he learned, the more interesting it became, and the more motivated he felt. With effort, knowledge turned into usable power, visible, tangible, and incredibly practical. Beyond that, there was the satisfaction of seeing a skill panel record his progress forever. There was something else too, something that made magic deeply precious to him. He had spent 3 months bedridden in the orphanage hospital once. His heart and body had gone numb. An owl braving stormy weather to deliver a letter, Professor McGonagall paying for his stationery and applying for bursaries, those things had given him hope and a reason to move forward. He had learned what it meant to cherish small miracles. Michael spread the board and pushed 2 pieces forward. "Oh, Xian, have you decided? Fancy a game?" "Sorry," Xian said, shaking his head. "I want to study." He took out another book he had borrowed from the library, Advanced Potion Making, and settled in. Chapter 28, Peeves the Poltergeist. Hogwarts' timetable was pleasantly relaxed for first years. They rarely had more than 3 lessons a day. On Thursdays, Xian's year had Charms, Defense Against the Dark Arts, and Transfiguration. Spells that gave immediate, visible results showed just how quickly some students advanced. Within days of starting, they were already at very different levels. Most of the first years could cast Lumos, but many only produced a faint, wobbly light. Some still waved their wands awkwardly, pausing over each syllable and loudly enunciating the incantation without making the tip glow. Xian, however, had reached a proficient level with Lumos. His light was not only brighter than most, but steadier as well. His movements had smoothed out. His pronunciation had become clear and confident. He suspected that once a spell reached a certain proficiency, one could perform it without speaking aloud, by thinking the incantation. The textbook Standard Spells Primary called this the early form of nonverbal magic, and magical theory explained it simply. Incantations are words used to trigger magic. If you can summon the words in your mind, the magic will respond. Very good. Very good. Quite a lot of you have learned Lumos, Professor Flitwick said, his voice bright and sharp. For those who have just started, practice is everything, but for a few promising little ones. He winked at Chien, Hermione, and a couple of others. I'll show you something else. Gather round, all of you who are comfortable with Lumos, and for those who haven't yet, remember my words, a flick and a swish, and think of light. Under Flitwick's efficient guidance, a small group moved on to the levitation charm. By the end of the lesson, Chien's levitation skill had jumped by 30 proficiency points, now 34,300. He left Charms feeling pleased and walked briskly down the long corridor toward his next class. There were only 10 minutes before Defense Against the Dark Arts, not enough time to dawdle. They almost made it. An uninvited guest had other plans. Aha! First-year brats, a shrill voice cried as a ghostly figure darted from behind a door. It clapped a waste paper basket over Seamus's head. My eyes! I can't see! Seamus shouted, fumbling beneath the bin. The same prankster yanked a rug out from under the group, sending several students stumbling, and then latched onto Michael's nose and shrieked, Got your nose! Anthony and Terry stepped back reflexively. Then, seeing Michael on the floor, they moved closer to help. CN reacted quickest. Peeves, the bloody Baron is here, he called at the top of his voice. The shriek that answered was more panicked than mocking. Peeves the poltergeist screeched and flew off down the corridor as if a headless knight were approaching. Chien and a couple of others hauled Michael to his feet. Around them, the other first years looked at Chien with grateful awe. Thanks, Chien, Michael said, reddening. He glanced up and down the passage to be sure Peeves was gone, then sidled closer. How did you know Peeves was scared of the bloody Baron? Percy, the Gryffindor prefect, told us, Chien said. He wasn't lying. Percy had indeed said it, but the truth of how Shi-Un had learned so much about Hogwarts was more complicated. They quickened their steps up the spiral staircase until the warm glow of torches in the corridor made everyone breathe easier. Peeves lived up to his name, mischievous, noisy, and forever streaking through Hogwarts, leaving chaos in his wake. He had no physical body, could pass through walls, and had a translucent, ghost-like appearance, but he wasn't one of the school's ghosts. Chien had read about him in Dark Forces, a guide to self-protection. The book explained that Peeves was a poltergeist, a prankster spirit formed from chaotic psychological energy, not the remnant of a dead person. The other Hogwarts ghosts openly acknowledged that Peeves was not like them. Theorists suggested poltergeists often arise from subconscious unrest, particularly among oppressed or tense groups, hardly surprising in Hogwarts, where generations of students had lived under long-standing pressures. Chien had lingered over another passage in the book as well. It recommended that young wizards learn certain practical defensive spells, green sparks, red sparks, the knockback jinx, the smokescreen, and of course, Lumos. He made a mental note of those first four. If he memorized them, he'd be well prepared for defense against the dark arts. How to learn them, though, nagged at him. He glanced toward the defense classroom and saw Professor Quirrell, stuttering and uneasy, about to take the lesson. Chien sighed quietly and let his plans for an immediate crash course slide back into his notebook. There were other, more pressing anxieties waiting in the dungeon, the looming question of potions practice under Professor Snape, and he would have to face those in time. Chapter 29, Secretly Brewing Potion. Potion making always took a long time. Some rare brews, like Felix Felicis, were said to take half a year. With that in mind, Chien scheduled his experiment for after the first Transfiguration class that afternoon. He had prepared 5 sets of ingredients and brought his crystal vial, an expensive container, tucked into its own little box. It had cost a full 7 galleons, and Slag Jig's kindly shopkeeper had thoughtfully given him the box. The old wizard with the long beard had claimed, these crystal vials preserve potions twice as well as ordinary glass bottles. Chien suspected he was exaggerating. The book said that so long as a potion was stored correctly, it wouldn't spoil, even left out in the open. Ancient wizards sometimes used kettles to store potions, and potion makers back then enjoyed pouring different brews from the same vessel to amaze Muggle nobles. Potions spoiled only under certain conditions: exposure to light, improper sealing, and if a potion did go bad and cause trouble, Shien figured he'd know by morning. There'd be a wanted poster on the castle gates. That afternoon, a pure white owl flew overhead, calling in its grumpy way. The sun was warm, as if determined to bake every young witch and wizard. Shien had never seen a more brilliant summer. Hogwarts and the surrounding countryside were gilded, the island looking like an oil painting dotted with golden spires. If only Professor Snape's classroom weren't in the dungeons, the mood would have been even better. He felt a little like a thief about to steal treasure. He was going to brew a rare potion right under Snape's nose. Shien walked along a lush stone path and pushed open the oak door of the greenhouses. He had promised Professor Sprout he would help collect bubble pods and transplant some leaping toadstools into Greenhouse 1. A sweet, earthy scent filled the air. Fine droplets of water had condensed on the glass ceiling and trickled down in slender rivers. Professor Sprout wasn't alone. Neville was there, round-faced and earnest. Ernie was carefully watering, and a short, plump boy Shien didn't recognize stood nearby. Professor Sprout stood beside a wooden box piled high with fresh manure. Her gray-brown hair was pulled into a tight bun, and under her patched hat, a pair of bright eyes watched her students. She clapped her soil-stained gloves together and hurried toward Shien. Oh, this time of year, new sprouts are always appearing in the greenhouse. What excitement! She opened the door to Greenhouse 1. Come on, Mr. Green, let's fetch the leaping toadstools. Those little scamps are probably getting impatient. Her hat usually bobbed in rhythm with her sentences, but today something about it caught Shien's attention. The blackness of the hat made him think, absurdly, of Professor Snape's somber eyes. I'm secretly brewing a potion, he thought. That shouldn't break any school rules, right? He snapped out of it to find Professor Sprout's gentle, steady gaze on him. My dear Mr. Green, you seem a bit lost in thought, she said, but there was no reproach in her voice. The timing couldn't be better. Come along. There are interesting things waiting for you. She led him without answering his questions toward another domed building marked Greenhouse 3. Shien had never been inside. Michael had warned him that Greenhouse 3 held even stranger, more dangerous plants. Professor Sprout drew a large key from her belt and opened the door. A damp, fertilizer smell rushed out. Thorny tendrils reached and flexed. Green, bean-like fruits hopped and bumped against a low fence. Shien recognized the fruits as leaping toadstools, but around them grew venomous tentaculas, so why hadn't the tentaculas attacked? Professor Sprout's voice rose above the rustling plants, warm and amused. Leaping toadstool seeds need dark, damp places to germinate, exactly where venomous tentaculas like to gather. About a third of the leaping toadstools in the greenhouse grow with a tentaculas as their neighbor. The tentaculas won't allow other plants into their territory, and yet the toadstools still thrive. She bent down, speaking in a deep storytelling tone. If you look closely, you'll see fanged geraniums towering beside them. It's the mutual deterrence of those two that creates the conditions for the toadstool seeds to break through the soil and leap away. Nature is always clever. Life finds a way. Her eyes were sincere and warm as she straightened. Leaping toadstools that stay far from danger are safe, but if you're so afraid of the tentaculas that you hide in a dry, hot corner and let the fruits wither, my dear, that's not what life is for. The story struck Shien more than he expected. Professor Sprout smiled at him and nodded softly. You will succeed. Don't be afraid, little fellow. She knew what he was planning. Walking out of the greenhouse, Shien felt calm and steady, the smell of earth clinging to him. If Professor Sprout had guessed his secret and given him that quiet encouragement, then whatever he was doing wouldn't truly break the school rules, or at least not in a way that would have serious consequences. After the afternoon Transfiguration class, under Justin's admiring gaze and Hermione's puzzled look, Shien slipped down a corridor. The air grew cold and damp. Jars of preserved specimens lined the walls, their glassy eyes and pinned limbs staring out. He held his breath, praying Professor Snape wouldn't appear. Professors were busy, he told himself. Snape, busy as the head of Slytherin, wouldn't be hovering in the corridor. He glanced at the classroom and exhaled in relief. Quickly, he set out his ingredients on the table and lit the cauldron. The faster he worked, the more trials he could run. He put down his notebook and a quick notes quill. Recording results was crucial. Summarizing experience and improving his technique was the proper way to learn. White smoke rose in graceful spirals from the cauldron, and Shi-En's emerald eyes reflected the flickering candlelight as he began. Chapter 30. Successful Potion Brewing. Potion making often looks so muggle-like that many people think if you follow the steps, even a muggle could brew one. The truth is the opposite. Even with all the ingredients and the exact instructions, a muggle still could not make a proper potion. Brewing requires magic, sometimes even a wand, and the magical element often comes at the very end. For Murtlap essence, that magic appears in the final gesture and the whispered words that roughly mean, "May this potion possess the ability to heal Murtlap." Shi-En was in the dungeons, carrying out the earlier mundane steps. Thin lights speckled the stone walls. The cauldron simmered over a low flame, sending up white steam and a faint herbal perfume. The empty room echoed only with the soft gurgle of bubbles and the rustle of pages as Shi-En turned through magical potions and brews. Professor Snape had made the priorities clear in the first lesson: precision and strictness. Shi-En flipped to the required section. He had memorized it, but kept the book at his side anyway, just in case. First step: weigh the ingredients and boil the horned slugs. Before the cauldron had finished preheating, Shi-En measured 4 exact portions of ingredients. He boiled the horned slugs, crushed the venomous snake fangs with the table tools, and chopped the pre-soaked, treated dried nettle. Greenhouse skills he'd learned came into play. He processed each component cleanly, with time to spare. He recorded weights, the state of each ingredient, and monitored the flame. The dungeon cauldrons lit themselves, but he knew he'd have to learn to control heat with a wand eventually. Shi-En liked to prepare thoroughly. Second step: remove the slugs, add dried nettle, venomous snake fangs. He reread the passage to steady himself against nerves. The brown-black book with a cauldron stamped on the cover lay open. Its first page read, "Basic Brewing Method. This book is sufficient." Third step: stir 2 circles to the left, then 3 to the right. The force must be moderate. Shi-En stirred with careful, measured pressure so the bubbles were crushed but not broken. He was nervous. Snape could appear at any moment, and the practice might fail. People fear the unknown. Shi-En was no exception. He was serious and careful. Almost there. Add the slugs back, remove the cauldron, add porcupine quills. The slugs dissolved as they hit the liquid, and the potion lightened to a pale blue. Shi-En counted silently. 25, 24, 23. He tracked times, ingredient states, and the heat. Then came the most crucial instant. He stirred, made the final gesture, and mouthed the spell. The cauldron gurgled, and the contents turned into a blue-green, jelly-like mass. Blue-green? There was no confirmation chime from the book. Shi-En knew he'd failed, but it wasn't a complete disaster. The result was close. He frowned. If the ingredient prep had been correct, the error lay in the brewing itself, the stirring, the heat, or the final incantation, or all 3. A line from magical theory surfaced in his mind. When you master a magic, to truly unleash its full power, you need sufficient spiritual strength. He remembered the wording, a magic. Did potion making count the same? He knew his potion talent was limited. Like spells, it would take many practices to master. He lacked both time and ingredients, so he looked for a shortcut. He pulled advanced potions from his bag and skimmed the dense text until a passage made his eyes widen. The Ministry classifies certain potions as high risk because their effects are strongly influenced by the brewer's emotional state. Strict supervision is required. It didn't specify which emotions, but nervousness and mechanical repetition were clearly not helpful. When he relit the cauldron and steam rose again, Shi-En consciously loosened the tension in his shoulders. If Professor Snape found him, success or failure would hardly matter. He'd be in trouble either way. That thought steadied him. Whether he failed spectacularly or failed quietly, the consequences would be bad. The only smart option was to focus. His green eyes went calm. His stirring found a rhythm that felt right. Not anxious, not rushed, but sure. He was used to holding himself. Surviving Holophos Orphanage had taught him that. The nettle melted like rock candy, fangs fizzed and dissolved, everything behaved as it should. He used the same heat as before, but now he felt like an artist at work. White steam billowed, time passed in the hush and the tiny clink of his spoon against the cauldron. When he added the porcupine quills, the flame seemed to dim, and the mixture drew everything into itself. Shien concentrated on the ritual and spoke the spell. This time, the cauldron responded quickly, as if in tune with his will. The liquid churned fast, became jelly-like, and its color shifted to a dark, proper green. You have successfully brewed a pot of Murtlap essence to an apprentice standard. Proficiencies 1. Shien's eyes shone. He stared at the dark green, jelly-like potion, a small, involuntary smile appearing on his lips. He immediately set about writing everything down in his notebook. He even capitalized the lesson he felt mattered most. Potion is a precise craft. The wizard's focus and calm are key. He was still jotting notes when the torch on the stair to the dungeons guttered. Above the cold steps, the black hem of a robe suddenly billowed. Chapter 31. Outraged. Severus Snape was in no mood to be patient today. The cowardly, timid boy he'd been keeping an eye on had been growing more elusive lately. Whatever it was Shien was up to, he had better hope Snape never caught him. He turned a corner on the stair and froze at a faint gurgling sound. No one at Hogwarts knew that noise better than he did, the steady bubble of a potion simmering in a cauldron. He was not in the dungeons, which meant someone had trespassed. Snape swept down the stone steps like a gathering storm. "What are you doing?" he snapped, appearing before Shien, voice tight with barely suppressed fury. "How dare you? Utterly insolent." Shien stood by a cauldron that belched thin white smoke, with ingredients scattered around and a small crystal vial of dark green liquid on the table. The sight told Snape everything, brewing without permission. In his eyes, that was not a youthful mistake, but reckless arrogance. Potions was exacting work and dangerous. One misstep could kill a student before anyone had time to react. He could not tolerate such behavior. "So this is Mr. Glynn of Ravenclaw," Snape hissed, contempt coating every word. "You think yourself some prodigy of potions, do you? That you can brew a flawless potion without guidance? What nonsense. Do you believe this is astronomy or the history of magic? Potions is an exact science." Shien kept his head bowed, showing no panic, no plea. He understood that explaining himself now would be suicide. Snape's voice dripped derision. "Let's see what masterpiece your arrogance has produced. After your last disastrous attempt, I expected more brains from a troll than from you." Shien's smile vanished. He swallowed the flare of emotion and said only, "Sorry, Professor Snape," quietly. Snape's sneer faded into a cautious, inspecting frown. At least the cauldron hadn't exploded like those Gryffindor idiots. He moved closer to examine the potion. Despite his indignation, curiosity and professional habit made him check. Was the batch stable? He studied the dark green liquid and the final state of the brew. Then his expression shifted from contempt to grudging surprise. The potion was not excellent, but it was a qualified brew. Shien had made real, measurable progress. "This is your work?" Snape asked, eyes narrowing. Shien nodded once. Snape's lips tightened. "Your stirring arc was far too wide. Your heating, absurdly inconsistent. Only your preparation of the ingredients reached a passable standard. The frightening thing is you don't even see where you went wrong." Even as he mocked, Shien listened like a scholar. He memorized each criticism, jotting mental notes before Snape's sneer even finished. That stung Snape, the boy's composure and focus. Then, with a harsher tone, Snape barked, "Out of the dungeons. Now. Immediately." Shien did not hesitate. He gathered the crystal vial, his books and ingredients, and left the dungeon without argument. No fury, no humiliation, only an even calm. As he walked away, he gave a small, formal, "Sorry, Professor Snape." Snape watched the light in Shien's emerald eyes dim and disappear at the end of the corridor. For a moment, a strange warmth brushed him, an unexpected reaction to seeing the boy go. Then the warmth was gone. He waved his wand. The cauldron rose, the dark green liquid settling quietly as if nothing untoward had happened. The potion itself gave him the final say. From the potion's finish, Snape could deduce the effort behind it. In 3 days, the boy had raised his ingredient preparation to a barely passing level. tightened his stirring, and crucially, achieved absolute focus at the most important step. Given his poor handling of heat and bad timing, errors he still made, only that focus had saved the brew. To have reached that point in such a short time suggested sleepless nights and intense study, perhaps accompanied by detailed herbology work. Snape felt the old pang of professional admiration wound through his contempt. "He has improved," he muttered to himself, folding the assessment inward. "A pity the art of potions doesn't favor those without greater talent." Back in the corridor, Xian glanced at the small panel that hovered for only a blink before the system fed him the update. MERP Essence unlocked. 1 apprentice-level potion brewed. Apprentice-level title in potions now unlockable. The proficiency for Murtlap Essence required 30. Brewing this apprentice-level potion had registered as the first step. Everything seemed to be falling into place, and yet, at the most critical moment, he'd been exposed. There was no predicting Professor Snape's movements. He taught potions on Mondays and Fridays, but otherwise, he could be anywhere. Xian stood in silence, thinking. He needed practice. Without it, no improvement. He would practice by the book, by the correct methods, so his mistakes would not put anyone in danger. Practice would be safe and effective, but communicating with Snape, that seemed impossible. As he made his way to the Great Hall, a thought struck him. Professor Snape had not banned him from the dungeons, nor had the man docked house points. Why? Xian couldn't be sure if he was reading too much into it, but a small flicker of hope kindled. Perhaps an opportunity remained. Snape, meanwhile, had returned the cauldron to its place and examined every aspect of the brew again. He could almost imagine the boy's sleepless nights, the painstaking correction of technique. A begrudging respect settled into his voiceless thoughts. In the Great Hall, Xian took out his personal notebook and began to record everything. Each step, the timing, the temperature, the feel of the stirring. He wanted the process etched into his memory. Would Snape's scorn make him give up potions? As likely as Snape awarding Gryffindor 100 points, he thought wryly. Snape would not be everywhere. The cauldron would not care who used it. He closed his notebook, resolved. He had brewed 1 good potion. He would brew 100 more. Chapter 32. The Hidden Room. And decided to keep an eye on Professor Snape's whereabouts. Snape hadn't explicitly banned him from the dungeons, but it seemed wiser to give the potions master a wide berth. There was plenty of room to avoid him anyway. Snape was constantly busy at Hogwarts. As a professor, he had classes to prepare and papers to mark. As a head of house, he had to mediate student squabbles, sniff out early romances, and deal with whatever mischief Gryffindors got up to. And on top of that, he carried out whatever special tasks Dumbledore assigned. It was easy to imagine the sort of summons that might reach Snape. "Merlin, Professor, those Gryffindor boys are causing trouble again." Between lessons and discipline and Dumbledore's odd requests, his schedule was overloaded, and he had no assistant to lighten the load. If Xian remembered correctly, Snape's office was at the far end of the dungeons anyhow. There should be plenty of opportunities to steer clear. For now, the Great Hall felt warm and safe. 2 blurry shadows moved across the stone floor as the fireplace crackled. "I must say, Charm's essays are the easiest to write," Justin remarked with a faint smile, a small enchanted lantern in his left hand. With his right, he slipped a 5-inch-long Charms essay and a pale blue notebook into his bag. Hermione raised her chin and gave Justin a narrow look that said, "You're not right," before stepping into the hall with a large stack of books. They'd come straight from the library and still smelled faintly of ink. Charms assignments were deceptive. "This is a wand movement. This is an incantation. Now write a 5-inch essay on the levitation charm." The work required more than rote memory. It demanded experimentation, cross-referencing, and careful thought. That meant spending hours in the library. Hermione, who had memorized first-year textbooks and could find any reference in seconds, and Justin, who wasn't as book-savvy, often spent their free time there. Professor Binns's rambling lectures didn't help either. Today, Justin had finished a 1-foot-long History of Magic essay and the levitation charm assignment within 3 hours, which even Hermione admitted was fast. "You wrote a good charms essay, but your levitation still didn't improve in practice this afternoon," she teased, raising an eyebrow at him. Hermione glanced at Justin. I'm guessing you borrowed someone else's method, maybe CN's. Justin didn't look embarrassed. He smiled and said, half right, CN told me the method. He did? Hermione lowered her voice, but then looked up as if searching the room for the student in question. The great hall was crowded with students in identical robes. It was easy to miss a single face. Justin, however, gestured. He's right there. Shien, Justin called out cheerfully. Shien managed to reply even while attacking a roast chicken. Justin leaned over and lowered his voice. Would you? Before he could finish, Shien, with his mouth half full, cut in. Oh, good. Justin's smile widened. He folded a parchment and passed it to Hermione. You have to see this. Hermione brushed her hair back and took the paper. 10 minutes later, Shien sipped his pumpkin juice and said, pleased. That's a clever structure. If only I'd seen it sooner. Hermione, overheard, let out an awkward, flustered sigh. Shien's hand trembled slightly, sending a ripple through his cup of pumpkin juice. He looked over to find Hermione blushing, her ears faintly pink. She stammered, unused to having her praise noticed. Justin, quick as ever, intervened smoothly. Yeah, Hermione said the method is amazing, and your charms notes, if I could only put that theory into practice, he said, steering the conversation back around to their subject. Shien nodded. He was still trying to decide whether the dungeons would be safe later. The likelihood of Snape being in the dungeons brewing potions was high, and potion making seldom took short periods of time. So he resolved to spend the evening on other subjects, starting with charms, the most practical choice. He needed to find somewhere to practice. We're going to practice charms. Shien. Want to come? Justin's light gray eyes brightened at the invitation. Shien was only mildly surprised. A few minutes later, the three of them walked slowly out of the hall, through a long corridor, and up a spiraling staircase. Hogwarts boasted 142 staircases, some broad and grand, some narrow and rickety, some that took you to different places on Fridays, others where a step vanished midway and you needed to leap. Many doors here wouldn't open unless politely asked or poked in the right spot. Some doors weren't doors at all, only stonework made to look like doors. Things in the castle shifted often. Portraits visited each other, and Justin swore the suits of armor even strolled around. In such a place, a hidden room didn't seem particularly strange. Chapter 33, Ravenclaw's Dream. We're here! This is the hidden room we found. After going up the spiral staircase for what felt like forever, the stairs from the second to the third floor finally turned and joined a seldom-used corridor. Not far ahead, Justin tapped the wall lightly and called out excitedly. 3 crisp knocks later, the wall that shimmered only by firelight revealed a painting. Originally, we stumbled upon it by chance, but after answering the painting's question, we could get inside that room. There's a lantern, Lumos. Justin's wand tip gave off a faint glow, followed by Hermione's, which was much brighter. Shien pushed forward. His wand shone like a small bulb. Oh, Shien! Justin murmured, and the three of them focused on the painting. The canvas was yellowed and cracked with age. It did not show a stern wizard, but a snow-white owl in a velvet waistcoat and tiny pince-nez. One claw fumbled at the glasses while the other gripped an old rolled parchment. What are you looking at? An owl is still an eagle, it snapped. Hermione laughed first. Justin followed, and even Shien's mouth twitched into a smile. It's you again! What are you laughing at? The owl demanded. It flapped its wings, and Shien started as if he'd felt a gust. I remembered something funny, he said softly. He never expected to see glimpses of his past life reflected in a talking owl. Hermione reddened and protested, and Shien couldn't help grinning. What are you laughing at now? The owl pressed. I was remembering something funny too, Shien admitted. The owl flapped in exasperation. The parchment in its claws shook. You're clearly laughing at me. You haven't stopped. Sorry, Hermione blurted. Sorry, Justin echoed. I apologize, Shien added, and they all attempted a solemn bow to placate the painting. You annoying young wizards, the owl chided. If you want to enter, answer my question. It unrolled the parchment beneath its claws. After a moment's consideration, somehow, impossibly, the owl did understand. It posed a question in a pompous voice. Hogwarts, peaceful Hogwarts. Tell me, why was Hogwarts built here? Its head turned the full 180 degrees it was so proud of. Justin and Hermione exchanged puzzled looks. Didn't it used to ask for Ravenclaw's true name? Justin whispered. Hermione, do you know? He added, looking at her expectantly. The bushy-haired brown witch thought for a few seconds and shook her head. The owl preened. It's because of Ravenclaw's dream. Before they could respond, a different, discordant voice drifted through the corridor. At Shien's quiet words, the owl stopped flapping and nearly toppled over. How did you know? It gasped, then gave a stiff little bow. As its wings moved, a crack appeared in the wall and a sky-blue door swung open. Shien turned the owl-shaped doorknob and pushed the door. A spacious room lay beyond. A scattering of desks stood in the middle, thick with dust. In one corner, a huge bookshelf leaned crazily. Most of its books spilled onto the floor, their pages brittle and yellow. Another corner held a pile of strange instruments, a complex crystalline lens assembly, and several glass cabinets with tattered labels. Apart from that, the room was silent. Shien, Ravenclaw's dream. What does that mean? Justin asked before they could begin to practice spells. Shien told the story in a low storytelling voice. Legend says the site of Hogwarts was chosen by Rowena Ravenclaw. From the lakeside, she once dreamed of a warthog that led her to a cliff, and so the school was founded here. He narrated the fated events of 1,000 years ago, as if recalling a dream. Justin moved closer, his face lit with eagerness. Hermione put down her wand and listened, eyes bright in the lantern glow. The three of them gathered near Shien's wand, huddled together in the dim room. Hogwarts, warthog, aren't they very similar? They say that's how the name Hogwarts began. Wow, Justin couldn't help exclaiming. Hermione covered her mouth at once. What a wonderful story. Just like Peter, what was his name again? Justin trailed off. The Tales of Beetle the Bard, Hermione snapped, glaring at him for spoiling the mood. Justin scratched his head and lit the magic lantern again. After the story came practice. The levitation charm, a basic but essential spell, the first real test for newly admitted young wizards. Failed again, Justin complained under his breath. He had been trying to keep a feather afloat. It bobbed in the air for 3 seconds, then fell, far short of the 10 seconds required. You practiced the levitation charm at an introductory standard, proficiency. Shien shut out the surrounding noise, concentrating. The feather hovered a bit longer the next time, 1 second more, but still dropped. The same message popped up after each attempt. You practiced the levitation charm at an introductory standard, proficiency. He repeated the motion, and again and again. Each small success added another +3 to his proficiency, until after 10 tries, he had gained 30 points. While the repeated practices increased his skill, Shien felt his magic ebb away. His arm ached and his breath came faster. Magic here was not some abstract blue bar on a screen. It showed up in the body as fatigue and a lack of energy. It could be restored, but for now he felt depleted. He watched Justin struggle. Justin kept changing gestures, trying every tweak he could think of to steady the feather. Sometimes it surged up, other times it drifted uncertainly, then tumbled to the floor. Shien's heart tightened at the sight. Justin's concentration was good, but his control needed time. Hermione, ever patient, corrected small errors and encouraged them both. The three of them stayed late into the night. The owl's parchment rolled up and forgotten on a nearby desk, its painting looking down, as if bemused by the earnest, clumsy attempts of the new students. Chapter 34. Hufflepuff. Learning magic always leaned more on talent than on effort. Wizards like to explain the levitation charm as simply saying the word, then a flick and a swish of the wrist. Any deeper explanation was as vague as the gurgle of a cauldron. Even Professor Flitwick, when teaching first years, stressed clear pronunciation and the familiar flick and swish. After finishing Standard Spells Primary, Shien still couldn't find anything more detailed. He suspected spells followed ancient rules, empirical knowledge, and because it was empirical, it resisted precise explanation. For example, how big should the flick be? How wide the swish? Those were hard to quantify. They could only be resolved by a young wizard's talent. Of course, Shien also suspected that truly talented wizards didn't struggle at all. They succeeded naturally. That left the less talented wasting time practicing by luck. These problems, much like the ones he'd faced in potions, remained unsolved. He didn't think magic should be treated like science, but the rise in his proficiency told him there was at least a way to cast more easily. Yes, the arm should move more broadly. The pronunciation emphasizes the G. And there was a small detail. The die that follows still needs stress. A small enchanted lantern lit a patch of the practice room. Xian carefully coached Justin, applying everything he'd learned about the levitation charm. When Justin followed those standards exactly, the feather that had never floated more than 5 seconds wobbled and stayed aloft for 10. "Oh my goodness, Xian, we did it!" Justin cried, staring as the feather drifted downward. "This is all because of you. Thank you." Xian nodded. "I think a larger waving motion would be even better, but after emphasizing the D, do you still stress the Li?" Hermione, who'd been holding a book up to her face but watching the whole time, spoke up. Her tone couldn't help but be a bit haughty, but the two boys barely noticed. I think the Li should be stressed more. We can try a different waving motion, though." Xian glanced at the feather, about to admit his own magic hadn't fully recovered yet, when Justin cast the spell again. "Are all Hufflepuffs this meticulous?" Xian blinked. The three of them watched the feather wobble and float for 15 precious seconds. When it finally fell, Justin beamed. "Wow, Hermione, your guess was completely right." Hermione's cheeks flushed. She looked pleased. The three of them ran through a string of experiments after that, trying variations of motion and emphasis until Xian's magic had fully recovered. He practiced the levitation charm until he reached a proficient level, and then his magic was drained once more. Time slipped through their fingers like fine sand. The lantern swung as they left the hidden room, and Xian felt very satisfied. He'd gained 45 proficiency points. Hermione was pleased, too. She'd found a like-minded, even smarter partner in Xian. Justin, pale with exertion but still eager, seemed thrilled to have discovered a new continent of possibility. Hogwarts had already settled into sleep. Down the third-floor corridor, a section of wall shimmered and revealed a yellowed oil painting. It showed a snow-white owl in a velvet waistcoat and tiny pince-nez, human as could be, adjusting its precarious glasses with a furry claw, looking comically put out. "Young wizards! Nasty young wizards!" it squawked loudly as Justin and Hermione left the room. But when Xian passed, the owl quieted and murmured in a softer voice, "Young wizard, clever young wizard." While they waited for the moving staircase to settle, Hermione's voice drifted back over the rumble. "I think we'll probably need to keep using that room. We should tell Professor Flitwick. He'll agree to us practicing there." Justin was impressed. "How thoughtful. Just like you, Hermione." Hermione blushed and glanced at Xian. He gave a small nod, and she quickly said goodbye before disappearing down the corridor. That left Xian and Justin alone, walking under the warm torchlight. "By the way, Xian," Justin said softly, catching him off guard. "You didn't eat your Yorkshire pudding today. Was the potion brewing going badly? Could the two things really be connected already?" Xian only nodded. "Professor Snape? I heard he never lets first years brew potions without permission. He's much nicer to some older Slytherins. I don't think you've failed at brewing, but do you want me to help? Snape's scary, but I can go to his office with you." Justin's words made Xian increasingly quiet. He looked up at Justin's earnest face and the determined, gentle light in his eyes. "Remember, we're friends. If you're in trouble and I don't help, what kind of friends would we be?" That night, the pale blue curtains fluttered, and the wind outside the window made Xian feel inexplicably at ease. The fire in the common room crackled. He replayed Justin's words. "Even if I'm scared, I can still be brave. The prefect said there's no rule at Hogwarts forbidding first years from brewing potions." Ravenclaw only had herbology on Friday, so Xian had the whole day to wait for Professor Snape to leave the dungeons. He stared at the moonlight and let his thoughts churn. Hogwarts, a magical school a millennium old. Hufflepuff, a warm and wonderful house. The wizards they raised were lively, maybe not always outstanding or unforgettable, but as Helga Hufflepuff had said, hard work, loyalty, and fair-mindedness are all equally admirable qualities. A complicated feeling settled in Xian's chest. Advanced potion-making lay open on the windowsill, the pages whispering in the night. For a moment, he could almost see Justin's notes spread out across the library table again, and he remembered the prefect's words about Hufflepuffs. The prefect said Hufflepuffs are loyal and trustworthy. We don't pick fights, but we're not easily pushed around. Like our emblem, the badger, we protect ourselves and our friends and family. Nothing can make us afraid. Chapter 35. Unorthodox Knowledge. Shien's potion plan went even more smoothly than he had dared hope. An accident in potion class on Friday morning had turned everything in his favor. Neville had somehow drenched himself in a potion, his arms and legs riddled with red, swollen blisters. So Professor Snape had been summoned to the hospital wing. According to Justin's breathless report, Snape would be tied up there for a while, giving Shien at least 3 hours to work in the dungeons. The dungeons were as cold as ever, but Shien's enthusiasm didn't cool. He set out his ingredients and books and lit the cauldron. Justin had indeed stayed behind at the hospital wing to make sure Snape remained occupied. Every minute he could buy was another minute for Shien to practice. Shien told himself that once he had mastered potion making and could show real progress in the next class, Snape would probably allow him to brew in the dungeons like the older students did. After all, he was a Ravenclaw, not a Gryffindor. Reasonable, rule-abiding students shouldn't be singled out. Of course, that was assuming you weren't called Potter. Light the cauldron. Prepare the ingredients. Shien moved through the motions he already knew well. The real challenges were heat and stirring. The night before, he had devoured the entirety of advanced potion making and then paused on a strange, dense passage by Master Lebatius Borge. Different potions require different methods. From ancient times to now, physical phenomena without metaphysical insight and metaphysics without physical expression are both unsatisfying. Borge's prose was a little pompous, but tucked in that page was a practical revolution in empirical potion making. Every potion master knows heat is crucial. If you use a charm, anyone can make a perfect potion. But, as I said in Make Your Own Bottle-Bound Carnival, if the peculiar intuition the charm provides is lost, the cauldron becomes scrap iron. Shien flipped the page, and the most important part leapt out. Though this passage was once mocked as something only foolish wizards would trouble themselves with, and though it is not traditionally accepted, I say to hell with them. If you have found this passage, I will tell you. A self-heating cauldron can, with the right method, produce perfect heat. Seeing that felt like discovering the Half-Blood Prince's notes, or Hermione finding a time-turner. Shien felt the same thrill as if he'd found some forbidden secret. Everything he needed was here. He focused on brewing Murtlap essence. His stirring was no longer random. He adjusted it according to Snape's methods. His control of the heat followed Borge's guidance instead of vague intuition. The dungeon light was dim, but enough to silhouette his concentration. White steam rose from the cauldron like silk. With the gurgle of bubbles and the whisper of his breath, the potion turned a pale blue-green again. Shien knew the crucial moment was coming. He added the slugs just as before and began the final stirring. Around him, glass jars lined the stone shelves, filled with twisted roots, animal eyes, and shimmering scales. A cold drop fell from a moss-streaked crack in the ceiling and struck the nape of his neck, but Shien didn't notice. He and his spell, his practiced motions, and the potion's steam were one. You have successfully brewed a pot of Murtlap essence to an introductory standard, proficiency +3. The system prompt jolted him out of his trance. He blinked at the dark green, jelly-like liquid now settled in the crystal vial. The hardest part was done. Now he only had to maintain the standard, stabilize his skills, and finally rewrite his reputation as the white trash talent. His heart thumped. He moved quickly. He bottled the Murtlap essence, packed every ingredient into his bag, and carefully stored his books, advanced potion making and magical potions and brews, before waving his wand. Scourgify! The cauldron returned to its proper clean state. He checked the dungeon once more to make sure he hadn't left anything. As the chill in the hall softened with the sunlight, Justin appeared, anxious but relieved at seeing Shien. That went well? Justin panted. Shien nodded. From around a bend in the corridor, Professor Snape came up the stairs with his usual waxy paleness and hooked nose. Young students gave him a clear path. Everyone fell back like he was a storm passing through. Shien and Justin both felt like thieves. My mother always said doing bad things together makes a stronger bond than doing good things together, Justin said with a wry smile, then considered it. Although this wasn't really a bad thing. Shien gave him a puzzled look. Whatever Madame Finch Fletchley taught, it was oddly true. In the wizarding world, words like science were often frowned upon, and even a subject like potions, which demanded precise technique and scientific care, was wrapped in metaphysical tradition. But Lebatius Borge's approach, practical, exacting, and a little irreverent, had helped Shien immensely. Before lunch, he decided to head to the library to read Borge's other works. If there were more of those unorthodox notes hidden in advanced potion making, he wanted them all. Fridays in the Hogwarts library had a particular feel, an on-the-edge mix of urgency and laziness. Students suddenly realized how hard it was to finish homework without a proper study session, and the long oak tables were nearly full. The rustle of quills on parchment became the day's main sound. 5th and 7th years wore the strain of looming exams. Stacks of books towered beside them. First years weren't spared either. Every so often, one would mutter about a 1-foot essay for history of magic, and promptly be invited out by Madame Pince. Chapter 36, Grievance. A light rain fell over Scotland, and Hogwarts echoed with the steady drip of water. Drops gathered on the stained glass windows and slid down in thin streams that seeped into the centuries-old stonework. In the library, Madame Pince refused to let Shien check out more books than the rules allowed, despite his spotless return record. He could only borrow additional volumes after returning everything he had, including Modern History of Magic, and signing the crumpled ledger. So he had to make do reading 2 works by the potions master Lebatius Borge in the library itself. Even without borrowing them, he noticed the notice clipped to the first page. Warning: if you crease, tear, fold, soil, damage, throw, drop, or in any other way destroy, mistreat, or deface this book, I shall, within my power, inflict upon you the most terrible consequences. Irma Pince, Hogwarts librarian. Shien had no doubt of the librarian's resolve. He'd seen Madame Pince pounce on careless students more than once. She seemed to have an uncanny knack for finding book offenders and punishing them severely. As she paced through the study area, she passed him, her stern expression easing a fraction. She nodded almost imperceptibly and moved on. One passage caught Shien's eye. Wizards create spells when there is a need. Where no need exists, the spell simply hasn't been discovered. Likewise, potions are born of necessity. If a potion doesn't exist, the recipe remains undiscovered. The line made him sit up. He'd just read it in Make Your Own Bottle-Bound Carnival and felt its weight. He was still turning it over in his head when a slip of paper fluttered down beside him. He looked around, startled, then pulled out his notebook and quill and copied the message. Excellent, the note said. The fact you can read this proves the world is not entirely full of fools. I must tell you something, otherwise people will remember only my recipes and craftsmanship and forget my most misunderstood pioneering work in the deep arts of potion making. The greatest, most misunderstood pioneering work? Shien's curiosity spiked. He scribbled the rest. When the admonition, only carefully crafted potions will have the proper effect, became common, I was astonished to see that potion makers neglected its deeper meaning. What kind of researchers were they? They were, I have completed some necessary work. Improved rituals and spells are tending toward reliance on the caster's mental power and are more taxing on the mind, but for any potions master who has perfected their craft, this opens a new, vast path. I must warn you, you must have sufficient will and use it carefully. Its effects are astonishing, but it is unstable. It can be improved further, but my time ran out. I glimpsed a great truth and spread it in secret. Please perfect it. And please allow me to correct the epitaph those foolish wizards engraved for me and tell you the true thing. Lebatius Borge died in 1961, having devoted most of his life to this work. Now it is your turn to explore the deepest magic of potion making. Me? Shien felt a sudden, quiet weight of responsibility. He committed every word to memory. He hadn't expected to find such knowledge. Lebatius Borge had been probing the ancient rituals of potion craft. Many potion rites had been handed down unchanged for 300 years. They were as fixed as spell incantations. This discovery felt like a niffler finding a cache of old gold coins. He quickly copied the improvements into his notebook. There weren't many, just a few types, and by chance or fate, Murtlap Essence was among them. Shien's grin grew harder to hide as the library's lamp shone on his intent face. Soon he rose from the oak table. Hogwarts bells chimed, and the owls began to hoot. It was lunchtime. With his mind full of new ideas, he had to think about his stomach. He returned the books to Madame Pince and left. The corridors were already crowded with students headed for the Great Hall. Passing a warm fireplace, he noticed the Gryffindors unusually subdued. "He must hate me," a black-haired boy murmured, puzzled. "Didn't he in Wormwood? Why didn't he call on Hermione?" "Harry, don't be angry," the red-haired boy beside him whispered. "I heard Professor Snape is always like this, so unreasonable." Chien watched Harry and Ron sit not far away. He had an impression of the situation. In his previous life, some explanations of Snape's behavior were romanticized, treated as deep and meaningful, as if the language of flowers could express private grief. But here, Justin Finch Fletchley suddenly sat down beside him, face flushed, followed by a gloomy Hermione. "Even Professor Snape shouldn't be that unreasonable," Justin blurted, anger and sadness tangled in his expression. "If a student raises their hand and gives a wrong answer, the professor who asked the question is the real fool." Chien looked up, surprised. They had just finished potions class. Were they railing against Snape? He hadn't heard Harry curse the professor like that before. "Chien, I wanted to tell you earlier." Justin's anger faded when he saw Chien, and he replayed the scene in low, embarrassed tones. When Professor Snape questioned Harry, he ignored Hermione's repeated raised hand and then bellowed at her, "Sit down!" Not a single person in the class thought that was wrong. "Those Gryffindors are truly cowardly," Justin said, cheeks flushing, voice heavy with guilt. He had watched from behind the door, but hadn't intervened. "As a friend, I'm useless." Chapter 37, Fizzing Whizbees. "You've done very well." Chien split his Yorkshire pudding with Justin, thinking a sweet would lift Hermione's spirits. He offered the plate across the table. "Don't be sad, Hermione. Would you like some pudding?" Hermione, unusually, didn't refuse. The three of them gradually abandoned their complaints about Professor Snape and concentrated on the pudding instead. Chien liked Yorkshire pudding, a taste he associated with an old woman who used to bring food to the orphanage. She always brought puddings, and they were the best things he'd ever eaten. He always picked seats that came with the largest helping. "Professor Snape is a fool," Justin murmured, then launched into a litany of Snape's glorious deeds. Pretending not to patrol at night while actually using a disillusionment charm to catch 5 Gryffindors out after curfew, refusing to leave the school on Christmas and catching 2 couples sneaking about, deducting a point from Gryffindor because Harry supposedly misinformed Neville about a brewing technique when in truth, Harry had been clueless. "If anyone's at fault here, it's definitely not Hermione," Justin said softly. "We all know Snape's strict, ill-tempered, and sometimes downright unfair." Chien nodded. "If you doubt yourself because of someone unreasonable, even if he's a professor, that's too much to put on yourself," Justin added. Chien agreed again. Hermione trembled a little. Chien and Justin moved closer and stood up to shield her, pretending to chat so no one would notice the quiet hiccups of her sobbing. Justin whispered, "Hermione always keeps her feelings inside when she's hurt. We should watch out for her. She pretends not to care, and people who bully her never see how upset she really is. She doesn't have to pretend to be strong in front of us." Chien listened, thinking of how few friends Hermione had, ostracized by some Gryffindors, mocked by Ron, hiding in the washroom to cry before Halloween. He felt a small relief that she had at least 2 friends now. Ravenclaw's only class that afternoon was herbology. Chien arrived early and waited outside the glass-domed greenhouse. The air inside was warm and damp with the scent of earth. Sunlight filtered through the dome into a golden-green haze. Professor Sprout had her sleeves rolled up and dragon-hide gloves caked with humus, carefully tending to a plant that looked like a spider's nest. 3 Hufflepuffs clustered around a long trough where pumpkin-shaped plants grew, their scarfed heads bent together as they whispered and pointed. "Clever sprouts should remember this plant is called aspidistra," Professor Sprout was saying. "Although it looks like a spider's egg, those are green berries along the sides. Don't be frightened of the roots. They're not spiders, they're roots. Can anyone tell me how often aspidistra can be harvested?" The Hufflepuffs froze. Neville seemed to have an idea but stammered, and Ernie and the short, chubby boy looked completely bewildered. The book says it's a perennial, usually harvested 3 to 4 times a season. If well cared for, it can sometimes yield 5 harvests. A clear voice answered. Professor Sprout beamed. Mr. Green, that's an excellent answer. Good to see you. She turned then to instruct Neville and the others to collect Christmas cactus. Ah, warm sun, warm growth, there's always new life. Sometimes I wonder if I don't have enough energy. Otherwise, why would guiding so many young wizards be such hard work? Mr. Longbottom, watch your leg, Wingardium Leviosa. Neville almost knocked over a bucket of dragon dung, but Professor Sprout used a levitation charm to steady it. Oh, Mr. Macmillan, she cried, hurrying to help Ernie, who was surrounded by hopping toadstools. The greenhouse door opened. A tall figure leaned in, one shoulder against a plant stand. Not every first year is named Chien Green, are they? Senior Bruce teased, eyes bright. After class, Chien thought he might avoid the greenhouse for a while. Professor Sprout was sweating from all the fussing, especially with 3 Hufflepuffs left behind earlier. In the corridor, a gentle breeze moved the hanging ferns. Bruce stood there like a model for a wizarding magazine. A couple of older witches had already glanced his way more than once. Fizzing Whizbees, Bruce said, popping a candy into Chien's hand. Try one? Curious, Chien popped the little sugar ball into his mouth. A shout cut across the corridor. Green, don't eat it! Damn you, Bruce! Gold hair flashed as Senior Leon strode over, but he didn't reach them in time. Chien felt a peculiar tug in his stomach, and then the floor fell away. He began to float. Bruce, who had eaten one too, floated up beside him, laughing. Isn't it wonderful? He crowed. Leon grabbed them, one in each hand, holding them at his sides. I'd let you fly away if I weren't in such a hurry, he said, scowling at Bruce. He glared so fiercely that Bruce's laughter faltered. That's how Bruce treats his friends, Leon added more gently to Chien. Peester and I have been pranked by him 100 times. Fizzing Whizbees are little sugar candies that make people float. One of the ingredients is billywig sting. If you're hit by a billywig, you feel dizzy and then you rise slowly. When Leon looked at Chien, his anger softened. Bruce protested. Oh, come on, Leon, you wouldn't. Leon suddenly relaxed his grip, but with a small, smug smile, gave his wrist a shake. A rope became visible between him and Bruce. He'd tied them together. I always have dishonest methods for dishonest fellows, he said. Chapter 38, The Owl Portrait. After 3 in the afternoon, Hogwarts settled into the lazy softness of the weekend. For the younger students, Friday felt almost better than Saturday or Sunday. Homework could be put aside and an entire evening of rare free time lay ahead. Chien walked back from the greenhouses with the hem of his robe still damp from the clearing after the rain. Professor Sprout had told him that Professor Snape would be brewing potions for the next 2 days, so any plans to practice potion making had to be postponed. It felt like sitting on a treasure chest he could not open. He carried the knowledge of Master Labacius Borage with him, but could not use it yet. He resolved to slip down to the hidden room and practice the improved ritual until he could perform it flawlessly. He could also use the time to grind his spell work. From the distant lawn rose the incongruous chorus of childish voices. I'm going to chop off your head! No! Chien glanced over and saw a handful of students playing a boisterous game of hangman. Nearby, a sharp crackle of small explosions announced a game of exploding snap. The cards weren't dangerous, but they had singed the eyebrows of 2 players. There were all kinds of amusements in the wizarding world, not just Quidditch, wizard chess, and gobstones. Michael had discovered more than 10 strange games in his first 5 days at Hogwarts, and that was why he was still holed up in the library. If only he would stop shouting, Chien, save me, when he went back to the dormitory and just read Chien's notes quietly. Chien held a neat packet of fizzing Whizbees. He could still picture Senior Bruce being floated into the air like a balloon by Senior Leon, and as Bruce drifted downward, Senior Peester would slip another sweet into his mouth. When the last piece was herded into him, Peester beamed and announced, the Hufflepuff motto is, to share. Senior Bruce nearly roared the line. The afternoon sun lay over Hogwarts like melted honey, warming and softening the ancient stone. Tower spires cut their thin gold silhouettes against the clear blue, An owl hooted as it flew past. A gust ruffled Shien's hair. From farther away came the clear cry of a hawk. Justin came stumbling across the grass, breathless and exuberant. "Shien!" he called, loud enough to make Hermione nearby blow out her cheeks in irritation. A dark green book stamped with a dragon was being held open by the breeze in her hands. "Mother says nature heals everyone," Justin murmured, sliding up close. "Sunshine, lakeside, breeze, green grass. Even Hermione admits fantastic beasts and where to find them is interesting, and she hates admitting stuff." Magical creatures, Shien thought. The book was certainly full of oddities. He followed Justin's pointing finger to a passage. "I want to refute every other absurd claim in Miss Rita Skeeter's book," the passage read. "I only wish to add one point. I am not the heartless man who abandoned Seraphina Pickery. At the time, the president told me that if I did not leave New York quickly and voluntarily, she would take severe measures to expel me." Shien went a little blank. Gossip apparently flourished in every world, wizarding or muggle. And this, Justin turned the page. "The billywig is native to Australia. Anyone stung by one feels dizzy and then floats. Generations of Australian children have tried to catch billywigs just to float for a while." "Wizards can be ridiculous sometimes," Justin said, shrugging. "Right, Hermione?" "Indeed," Hermione said, snapping the book shut with a bright note in her voice. Before she could say anything else, Shien slipped a fizzing Whizbee into each of their hands. "Delicious," he said solemnly. For a beat, Hermione and Justin realized what had happened and stared at each other. "That floating feeling is really nice," Justin added, remembering. "Hermione and I asked Professor Flitwick for use of his classroom for a trial. The professor agreed right away, but he said, what did he say?" Justin's words trailed off as he got stuck in the corridor, but his eyes were smiling. "Idiot," he added to himself. "He said, of course, no problem, but it depends whether that owl portrait agrees." They climbed the spiral staircase and waited while Hermione explained in her usual precise tone. In the 10th century, there was only one school of magic in Europe, Hogwarts. Later, other schools were founded, and families chose to send their children to schools closer to home. Hogwarts, once enormous, had many unused classrooms. Most of those rooms were sealed by magic. Ours is one that wasn't sealed because... "There's a particular owl portrait," Justin cut in, grinning with pride, "that asks questions even clever professors might not be able to answer." Hermione rolled her eyes at his self-satisfaction. As they reached the landing, the yellowed, cracked canvas swung out from its frame. On it was painted a pure white owl in a velvet waistcoat and tiny pince-nez, cocking its head in that perpetual comic pose of trying to straighten its glasses while clutching the brittle canvas. "What are you looking at? An owl is not a hawk," the portrait squawked. "No laughing. I'm going to ask you a difficult question, a question that even clever young wizards can't answer." Justin's face immediately fell. He hesitated a moment, then tried to mollify the portrait with a lollipop quill. "If I'm not wrong, those are owl feathers, even if they're carved." "Oh," Justin exclaimed softly. Hermione snorted with amusement as he fumbled and shoved the lollipop into Cien's hands. "Do rats eat Mr. Owl?" Justin offered next by way of distraction, producing a squeaking sugar mouse in a last-ditch attempt to win favor. "I am a portrait," the owl snapped. It flapped its painted wings hard enough to set the canvas trembling. The whole image seemed to bristle with indignation. Hermione was already shaking with suppressed laughter. Justin sounded a little desperate. "Where am I supposed to find a portrait of a mouse?" Chapter 39, Mental Will and Magic. As Shien examined the candy that had suddenly appeared in his bag, Justin was nearly in despair. Mr. Owl huffed, clearly annoyed. "Young wizard, lucky you. Get in quickly. Don't let Miss Ravenclaw find you." As he spread his wings, a crack opened in the wall, revealing a sky-blue door. Hermione's eyes widened. "Thank you," she said. Justin wiped the crestfallen look from his face and thanked the portrait sincerely. Shien picked up the quill-shaped lollipop and fell into thought as they slipped into the hidden room. Hermione still wore a puzzled expression. Shien took out his notebook. Justin spoke softly. "Portraits get lonely too, right? Mr. Owl's been stuck inside the wall for ages. I guess he can't visit the other portraits like the rest. No wonder his glasses keep falling off." Shien said, then added, "If I didn't have anyone to talk to, I'd probably go mad." Justin looked like he'd thought of something. His light gray eyes darkened with sudden resolve. "What do you want to do?" Xian seemed to expect the question. "How about we try to move him?" Justin whispered back. "We can try." Xian nodded, but didn't truly believe it would work. Hogwarts was full of secrets. Even Dumbledore didn't know them all. The owl portrait felt like part of that web of responsibilities, almost like the fat lady in Gryffindor, a portrait whose duty was to guard an entrance. Such roles weren't discarded lightly, otherwise professors wouldn't have left this classroom unattended. Still, a small sliver of hope remained. After all, there was no harm in trying. He turned his attention to the notes he had been studying. One passage caught his eye. Murtlap Essence is one of the simplest potions and a commonly used one among North American witches and wizards. I have altered the ritual, greatly increasing the success rate and improving the potion's quality. Before using it, make sure you have mastered the improved ritual and can maintain the mental discipline required. This process demands going without sleep for up to 3 days. Greatly increased success rate? Improved quality? Xian felt a flush of excitement. Another note read with Boraj's dry humor. I can understand the excitement of potion researchers seeing this, but I must remind you, when brewing, make not a single error in the ritual unless you wish to pray to Merlin that, upon opening your eyes, you do not see me. Wizardly black humor, Xian mused, and immediately set about learning the improved ritual. Nearby, Justin and Hermione returned to practicing the levitation charm. Outside, owls streamed out across the twilight sky, carrying letters and returning with replies, the castle busy with the weekend messengers. Magic lanterns began to glow, and Justin's anxious face was lit by their light. Professor Flitwick said the feather has to make a full revolution. It's the sign that a wizard has truly entered the levitation charm, Justin said, voice edged with fatigue. He had followed Xian's instructions to the letter, but the feather refused to turn. Hermione looked troubled as well. Both of them were promising first years, but they felt a pressure when compared to the young wizard who treated Lumos like a remedy for tired eyes. Xian, on the other side of the classroom, had finished studying the ritual and turned to the last page of his notes. Another passage caught him. When a wizard pours strong emotion into a brewing potion, joy, anxiety, grief, it will significantly affect its outcome. That is why potion masters must remain calm and focused. Yet magic has two sides. Properly directed emotions can yield extraordinary results. The improved ritual seeks to channel those emotions constructively. The idea that appropriate feelings could enhance magic went beyond potions. Xian found it resonant with charms as well. A question from the previous charms class surfaced in his mind. What emotion was required for the levitation charm? He looked at the feather and asked himself why a feather was always used. Was it only because it was light? Because a feather, by its very nature, symbolizes freedom, freedom from gravity, a breaking of constraints, he thought. Wingardium Leviosa. You practice the levitation charm to an expert standard, proficiency 50. Xian's wand tip flashed and the feather wobbled into the air, circling a few times. Then, like a small bird beating its wings, it began to dance in a steady rhythm. Justin stared in astonishment. He just muttered something I couldn't make out and reached this level? Justin murmured, baffled. Sometimes I think Xian is exactly the wizard I pictured, muttering a few words and somehow defying my still unsteady sense of magic. Hermione watched the feather with a frown, glanced at her own wand, and sighed. Then a new determination settled across her face. The feather drifted down. Xian flicked his wrist and it rose again. Wingardium Leviosa. You practiced the levitation charm to an expert standard, proficiency 50. The panel notification chimed, and a wave of fatigue washed over Xian. He guided the feather into his palm and let it rest there, watching Justin's excited grin and Hermione's faint blush. As Professor Flitwick explained about Lumos, Xian said, spells become stronger when infused with a wizard's emotion. Lumos needs a craving for light. For levitation, the necessary feeling is liberation, liberation from the pull of gravity. Maybe that's why witches and wizards practice with feathers. Justin looked momentarily blank, as if the insight had never occurred to him. He and Hermione hurriedly took notes, copying every word Xian had said. Xian, in turn, took out his history of magic notes, Tomorrow he planned to finish the timeline and assemble a Shien-specific framework of magical history. Astronomy would be straightforward too. Young wizards weren't expected to reach great depths yet. He only needed to record the celestial trajectories. If all went to plan, by tomorrow his scholarship fragments would have increased to 4: charms, transfiguration, astronomy, and history of magic. Chapter 40: The Vastness of Magic. Everything about magic felt new and fascinating to Shien. Even the history of magic, which many young wizards complained about, was captivating to him. He was eager to learn the past of vampire hunters, to examine the wrongdoings of those wizards who specialized in hunting vampires, and to understand why Article 12 of the Non-Wizard Half-Human Treatment Guidelines declared that profession illegal. The intrigue of history held him until night. Cien lay on his 4-poster bed, Gifford Allerton's story still in his thoughts. Allerton was a famous giant slayer, a local hero for killing Hengist of Upper Barnton, and even featured on one of the chocolate frog cards. In the 15th century, when he lived, giants were much more numerous than they were now, so people like Allerton were needed to curb their numbers and protect the wizarding world. Werewolves, vampires, goblins, imps, trolls. Shien's imagination wandered through the epic tales of wizards, wands raised, spells chanted, magnificent adventures in this world of magic. His breathing evened out, and the gentle Hogwarts breeze seemed to flip the history of magic to a page filled with his notes. Miranda was a witch who once studied at Hogwarts. She found the then outdated Hogwarts textbooks incomprehensible, and as the youngest in her family, her sisters teased her relentlessly. Frustrated that her voice was rarely heard, this angry young witch invented the Bat Bogey Hex. She used it on her sister and vowed to write a clear, accessible book. Bathilda Bagshot's annotation: magic always embraces the wizard's belief. It is so generous to wizards who meet its conditions. Any wizard can create miracles. Shien had crossed out and rewritten his notes until only 3 words remained: magic, infinite possibilities. He imagined how he would cherish the chance if such a miracle descended on him. His answer was simple: he had to learn it all. By the time he left the library, the weekend had quietly slipped away. He carried a stack of books and walked under a moon as beautiful as the night he'd received his letter of admission. He could understand why Hermione always carried so many books. There was so much to learn. His free time was limited to a short weekend, barely enough to get through the history of magic. He'd only glimpsed a hidden corner of the subject: astronomy and its ties to divination and prophecy. That curiosity led him to skim all 13 books on astronomy and to the old volume Madame Pince had solemnly given him. Wizards use astronomy to connect the universe and themselves, and to find inspiration in magic. The magic wizards most want to explore always circles back to the vastness of the universe. Prophecy, destiny, time, and space all sink into the brilliant river of stars. As he read, Shien felt his enthusiasm flare like a hearthfire. He pictured the centaur tribes of the Forbidden Forest who read futures in the stars. He thought of Sirius, trapped in Azkaban, whose name, the Dog Star, matched his animagus form and hinted at his loyalty. A quiet suspicion took hold. The power of magic wasn't only in crackling spells, bubbling cauldrons, or magical creatures. It had existed long before the recorded history of wizards. Astronomy was one of the deepest veins of magic, so profound it could be linked to words like destiny. He kept the old book carefully in his bag. Whenever he had time, he was either in the practice room or the library, and this was the book he read most often. His only regret was that he couldn't fully understand it. Waiting for the centaur professor to teach felt agonizing. Sometimes Shien even wondered if he could contact him in advance. Professor Snape spent the entire weekend in the dungeons, so Shien couldn't brew any potions. There were losses, but also gains. His spell proficiency had advanced. Levitation Charm, Novice, Lumos, 1900. Scouring Charm, Apprentice, 297-300. Advancement, 3 novice spells required to unlock the novice title in the spell domain. Spell Talent, Green. His spirits mostly recovered, Shien took his wand from his bag and, with the small time remaining before curfew, went to the entrance of the hidden room. The owl portrait materialized at once, squawking in its familiar noisy voice. "Young wizard, clever young wizard, Answer my question. Shien waited quietly. Even though Justin's earlier attempt had failed, the owl had already stopped quizzing them about comings and goings. They could enter regardless. The portrait fluttered, parchment clutched in its claw. From the tranquil riverside emerged the wise and beautiful Ms. Ravenclaw. Where does this lakeside exist? The pure white owl set the parchment down and regarded him with confident expectation. Shien thought for a few seconds and then answered calmly, the Highland Valley of Scotland. The owl's tiny pince-nez slid down its beak. It froze in mid-flutter, and the sky-blue door of the hidden room slowly revealed itself. Thank you, Shien said softly before the owl portrait faded. He wondered if Ravenclaw had left behind more than her diadem. The site selection of Hogwarts, the castle's name, even its spiral staircases were all linked to that wise, beautiful woman. Her wisdom was woven into the school so thoroughly that the marvelous owl portrait felt fitting to him. We heard you, Shien. Inside the practice room, Justin and Hermione stood holding magical lanterns. Shien was a little surprised they were still studying so late until he saw the eager look on their faces. All right, Shien said steadily. This is a story about the 4 founders. Justin exclaimed. Cool, lit his wand and sat cross-legged around him. Hermione did the same and both sat up straight, breath held in anticipation. Godric Gryffindor, Shien began, is said to have been born more than 1,000 years ago on a moor in western England that later took his name, Godric's Hollow. Helga Hufflepuff is generally believed to have come from Wales, from open valleys known for their expertise in food-related charms. As for Salazar Slytherin and Rowena Ravenclaw,